Good evening, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. Tonight is combined forces of both Williams College environmental programs and the Hoosick River Watershed Association, the annual meeting. My name is Andrew Kozak. I'm the current president of the watershed, and we have Ariana Collins here, our executive director, and many of our directors, our other board of directors, are sprinkled throughout this audience here tonight. So we not only have to conduct a little bit of, I'll say, sleepy business because it's a requirement for a watershed organization, but after that, I'm sure you'll be mesmerized by the narrative you get from our guest speaker tonight, Ethan Papper. And again, Sarah will introduce him with all of his qualities and skills and experiences, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy that presentation tonight. But bear with us now, we have some serious business relative to the watershed organization, and we'll pace through it very quickly so you can move on to the guest lecture for tonight. And just so you know, after the question and answers of the guest lecture, we, as a separate watershed, will have a little micro meeting elsewhere that you don't need to attend, but it's, again, a requirement for us to conduct business in a certain format. So, again, welcome, Williams College, the community of Williamstown, and HooRWA members or would-be members. Having said that, I think it's now a good time for the land acknowledgement from Ariana Collins here.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know the Hoosick River Watershed Association, HooRWA, we offer opportunities in water quality monitoring, river and trailside cleanups, and public programming to introduce and deepen our connections to the Hoosick River watershed. We work to assist in public discourse and connection to the Hoosick River watershed, encouraging people to recognize the Hoosick River watershed, its beauty, tenacity, fragility of the watershed, and why it's so important to protect these natural spaces. And it is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, gathering, and doing water quality monitoring work on the ancestral homelands of the peoples of the waters that are never still, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship and being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We honor and respect their ancestors past and present as we work to commit building a more inclusive and space for all. So I am so grateful to all of our teams of volunteers who attend to our water quality monitoring work. Our work informs you, the public, and local and state agencies about the health of the river and the tributaries. Our work would not be complete without the dedication of the following people and teams. Our bacteria collection team included intern Z. Taylor from Williams College and Jacob Revitt of MCLA, Trout Unlimited Taconic chapter members, Justin Atkins, Steve Chick, Spencer Brian Series, and Rebecca Struder-Gozon, and Berkshire Community College professors Bruce Wynn and David Burgess, who ran the lab, all to test for E. coli counts in the river and tributaries. E. coli is used as a measure for what else could be polluting the river. Our La Rosa team, board members Wendy Hopkins, Tom Gentle, and Mark Merrill, collected water samples for chloride and phosphorus analysis, contributing to Vermont Department of Conservation's work. Science on the Fly team members from Hoosick River Revival, Pamela Torg and Kurt Gamari, continue to collect samples throughout the year, doing river profiling and chemical analysis. Temperature monitoring team members were our outgoing board members Dan Gura and Justin Atkins, and HooRWA advisor Richard Sussinger. Though Mike Cole and Kay Abbott are not volunteers, I am thankful for Mike's company Cole Ecological for taking over for Watershed Assessment Associates to conduct our benthic macroinvertebrates this year. It's heartening to see that given the species numbers and diversity, that overall the river is supporting species who need cold, clean waters. In 2024, HooRWA held and or participated in 26 events. Many were our 2 Wild Edible Walk program series in collaborations with local businesses, Wild Soul River, and offerings for community building. We tabled, we co-facilitated a river cleanup with South Williamstown Community Association. With Trout Unlimited Taconic chapter, we reimagined Riverfest. We hosted MCLA students in a service learning project, which resulted in which they planted native tree whips at rural lands for a demonstration bank stabilization site. We facilitated a river-inspired eco-poetry class, also with MCLA. We held a haiku on the Hoosick celebration at tourists. We installed a memorial bench for our dear beloved longtime board member, Tom Hyde. And we hope that you will enjoy all that we bring to you in 2025. Okay. This is our treasurer's report. But due to issues beyond our control with migration to QuickBooks Online, we have not been able to complete our 2024 reconciliation yet. But just know that we're in the black. Here are a few highlights. You can review the makeup of our revenue and all of our sponsors and grantors on the screen. In 2024, we received $50,000 from the Massachusetts Attorney General for water quality monitoring. We are leveraging this money to expand our benthic macroinvertebrate monitoring for the next 3 years. Wild Soul River and Offerings for Community Building donated half of their program income from the walks they led to support HooRWA. The Cultural Council of North Berkshire supported Haiku on the Hoosick. The Massachusetts Cultural Council supported Riverfest. Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration supports our involvement with Berkshire Clean, Cold, and Connected Coalition, and the remaining foundations and businesses all support our water quality monitoring work. I am feeling such gratitude for our funders, our sponsors, our major donors, and our members. It's folks like you that help to make this watershed work. We will be posting our final 2024 financial report in our forthcoming annual report, which will be available on our website, and of course, if you request it by me. So thank you so much for your time. And our next piece is our annual meeting minutes.
So, trust your speed reading here. And I'll ask for a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last annual meeting. Do I have a vote on that? Anybody want to move that? Elaine moves it. Second it, back there, okay. Any comments, concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now for our board of directors. Andy, want to stand over here?
I think so.
Thank you.
Again, as president, I win the prize, which is quite nice. Thank you. We always like to pick on people with broad range of experience, and so we currently have a vibrant board, active board, and we have recommendations here for continued board of director membership for Wendy Hopkins. Wendy, raise your hand, please. We have a recommendation to support Elaine Murphy. Would you raise your hand, Elaine? And we have support from another valued member, Sarah Gardner. Raise your hand. These are board members that are currently serving, and will be making a recommendation at this moment in time to continue their 3-year term of service as board of directors. And again, they have been valued employees, not employees, but board members in giving us direction and allowing us to do the good things that we do. So having suggested to you that as a nomination we continue with these 3 members, first of all, because I'm going on to another event here in a moment, can I have a second to that nomination to continue with the existing 3 members that I mentioned for board of directors? We have a second from Lauren, who is also a member, and a backup from Tom here for a second. Those in favor of continuing with those 3 members as board of directors, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, that moves forward. Now, we have something special here tonight. We have a new member of board of directors that's being recommended. It's a little difficult to read here, but we have a new gentleman here before us. And if you would stand up and briefly introduce yourself so the rest of the members can see you.
Tom Fiorentino. By means of introduction, I have some background in ecological things, but we can certainly elaborate if
Thank you,
Thank
Todd, I
you.
appreciate it. I asked you to do this because obviously I would be doing some accidental filtering. I'd much rather have people recognize who you are, and your level of interest is detailed here, which is before you. So I'd like to make a recommendation to support Todd as being a new board of directors. Do I have a second on that from the full audience here? We have a second with Wendy Hopkins, who's a board of director. Those in favor of recommending that Todd become a new board of director and create new vitality in our organization, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, moves forward. Thank you so much. Do we want to?
We can just list all,
Ah.
list them, and then we can move on to the next.
Okay, very good. Well, I'd like to thank these previous board members who have left for various reasons. We have Justin Atkins, who lives here in Williamstown. He has supported us with Trout Unlimited. He's also the president of Trout Unlimited, the Taconic division here. And he plans to continue supporting us in terms of water monitoring and other valued inputs. He has decided to leave the board. We have John Case, who's here in the audience here. He has contributed mightily, and again, we'll talk more about the specifics in a moment, but he has contributed mightily, but has decided to step down from the board of directors here. We have Dan Gura, active member, works for Rural Lands, has some additional projects he wants to work on beyond Rural Lands employment to work on some mountain bike trails and things like that. So he's going to be a very busy gentleman, so he decided to move on. And of course, we have Gene Knoll, who decided to retire from the Fairlock Federal Credit Union and move to the Carolinas. So for good reasons, these people, as much as they support HooRWA, have had new things occupy their mind or decided to move on. So again, I do want to thank them. And more specifically, we have a special thank you for John Case. John Case, would you come down here for a moment, please? John Case has been a member of the organization and a board of director for decades. And Lauren Stevens here, who is one of the founding members of the organization that developed in 1986, would like to further discuss John's contribution to HooRWA.
Well, there are many reasons why HooRWA needed John Case. We needed a poet who could also organize poetry workshops and poetry presentations, specifically haiku. We needed a musician who could also provide a band to liven up some of our activities. We needed a trail guide who could also create a new trail. And we needed a former English teacher who could also come up with fundraising skills. Imagine that. So those are all some of the reasons we needed John Case, a man for all reasons. Sorry.
No, that's wonderful. That's good. As a result of Lauren's legitimate and kind words, we wanted to, as an organization, present to John something very special to us. It is almost a life-size photograph of John Case here. And we happen to be on this day working on the memorial bench for Tom Hyde. Tom Hyde is a local physician who passed away a year or so ago, and we honored his contribution to HooRWA, the love of the river, and all the other good things he has done around us by installing a bench along the shoreline of the Hoosic River. And John was most instrumental in wishing to help design and install this bench. And this is, when he came off that work day, we just felt it was an appropriate catch-all photograph of John Case. And you'll notice, it's tough to read, but here on the left-hand side, we have a little piece of John Case's personal haiku messaging that Lauren reiterated to me that John once wrote. And let me just, for the sake of having an audience here, just quickly read this message. And they sound peculiar, but it's haiku related. It says, Hoosic, the beyond place, but our paddles wake an owl right here. So again, John is fine arts, a refined individual who has enlightened us all, helped raise fundraising monies, and has really been a good guy, and we just want to thank him. Many, many thank yous. I appreciate the time and dedication.
I just want to say one thing. Andy's right that I did help organize installing the bench for Tom Hine, but only Andy was strong enough to lift that bench. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to invite Sarah up here to introduce our guest speaker, Ethan Tapper. You have the details, and thank you so much.
Okay, great. Is there a mic?
This is
You're
active.
right there.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see so many people come out for a talk about forests. I am, in fact, a long-term board member of HooRWA, and it's a real pleasure to serve on the board with all these amazing, incredibly knowledgeable and dedicated people that do really important work. So at the annual meeting, we often have a speaker. I guess we always have a speaker. And Ethan Tapper was good enough to come down from Vermont to speak with us today. So I read his book this fall, and I have to say it's a real page turner. And I was surprised. It's really well written, and it's fun to read. And I learned a lot about forests. So I highly recommend the book, and I see there's some over there too.
So you can purchase one.
Yes, you can also listen to it online. But anyway, Ethan is a forester, a digital creator, and the best-selling author of How to Love a Forest, The Bittersweet Work of Tending a Changing World. For more than a decade, Ethan has been recognized as a thought leader and a disruptor in the worlds of forestry, conservation, and ecosystem stewardship, winning multiple regional and national awards for his work. His message of relationship, responsibility, and hope reaches millions of people each year through his writing, his social media channels with tens of thousands of followers, and the dozens of walks, talks, and keynotes he delivers across North America each year. In his personal life, he works, writes, hunts birds at Bear Island, which is his 175-acre working forest, homestead, orchard, sugar bush, and he runs 3 businesses: Bear Island Forestry, Bear Island Consulting, and Bear Island Maple. But the most interesting fun fact is that he plays in a 10-piece punk band called the Bubs. I don't know if they're here tonight, but maybe we can all hear them later. So, Ethan, come on up.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for introducing me, Sarah. I'm Ethan. Nice to meet you. So my name's Ethan Tapper, and I'm a forester and now author from Vermont. And I'm here to talk to you about what it means to love a forest. And I got to tell you, it's still so surreal that I get to do this. I had the opportunity, the privilege to, last year, after about 8 years of working on it, get to publish this book, which is called How to Love a Forest, and which is definitely like the coolest thing that I've ever done. And what this book really is I say that it's a love story. And it's a book about forests and ecosystems and biodiversity, but ultimately what it means to care for all of those things at this moment in time. I've had the experience over the last, 4 months plus since the book came out to get to visit, I've been all across New England and beyond, and to get to carry this message to a lot of these independent bookstores and universities and libraries. And I have to tell you that I have the experience of being writing books is a thing that other people do. It's not a thing we do. It's a thing that other people do, even as I'm surrounded by all these books everywhere. And it's kind of a funny thing that just happened to me in a weird way. And so tonight I want to do some readings from the book. I want to talk about the book itself and how it happened, and just talk about forests in general. So for me, when I started this journey of writing this book, didn't know how to do it, never written a book before. I'd done like a little bit of writing. I did some creative writing in high school and some informational writing as a professional forester, but there was some stuff that I really wanted to talk about. And I was working as a forester and seeing a few kind of like really big themes that weren't addressed in any other book that I found. One was just sort of where our forests are at. So there's this really interesting and cool and also bittersweet and scary thing that happens to you when you really kind of like enter into deep relationship with these ecosystems and you're just in them every day, which is that, you know, normally a normal person, let's say, walks through the forest and they're like, it's beautiful and it's perfect and it's peaceful and everything's good. It makes you feel so amazing to be there. And when you actually like learn more about these ecosystems, you learn that they still are beautiful and peaceful, and they're also dealing with like all of these really significant threats and stressors, that they have been altered, that they are marked by these incredible pervasive legacies of the way that they've been managed in the past. I don't know if you know that basically every forest you've ever been in New England has been cleared in the last 200 years. Many of them maintained as an agricultural field for the following centuries. And now just beginning this process of reverting back into what a forest really is like, dealing with all of these threats and stressors in the present, the volume of things that we refer to collectively as global change, right? And which includes things like climate change and also non-native invasive pests and pathogens, pollution, deer overpopulation, forest fragmentation, deforestation, and all these other things that collectively comprise the sum total of the threats that forests face, and that are, of course, moving into this future that promises all of those things and more in a way that forests have probably never seen. And so you start to see all of those things, and suddenly, you know, these beautiful, perfect forests, the situation becomes a little more complex, right? And suddenly, you start to wonder what can be done in this moment to help these forests actually move forward and to navigate all of these really extreme challenges. So I was noticing all those things, working as a forester in Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, and Maine, and then also realizing that like there were all these tools that we have to actually help them that can be used in these incredibly important ways to actually like help deal with some of these problems, but also that these tools are like really counterintuitive, right? Things as complex, as difficult to understand as like cutting a tree, killing a deer. And that when we would use those tools, even with the best intentions in mind, that they were commonly misunderstood because they're incredibly difficult to understand. And there was this, I felt like this idea that to protect forests, to love a forest, meant leaving them alone. And I wanted to share a different vision of what it can mean to love a forest, which is based not just on inaction and doing what is most comfortable, which is often protecting forests from ourselves, holding them at arm's length, you know, having this idea that like over here is nature, and here we are, the humans, and all we got to do to care for these forests, to protect these forests, is to protect them from ourselves, but to posit a different vision, right? And so I started to write this book, and I think that one of the best things that I ever did in service of like actually getting this project done is to not allow myself to believe that I was trying to write a book. Because if I had tried to do that, it would have been like way too intimidating and I never would have even started. And so what I figured out was that the time when my brain works the best for writing is the first hour that I'm awake in the morning, 5 to 6 a.m. for me. Not everybody needs to wake up that early, it's just when I do. And so I just started to write for an hour every day. And it became actually like this practice that was really an important part of my life, where just every day I would get up, this very beautiful, quiet time of the morning, and I'd write for an hour, tapping away on the laptop, and then I'd like close the laptop, go work in the woods. And it's one of these things that was just became not just something that I did to achieve an outcome, but just an important part of my life. A beautiful way to spend the first hour of my day. At the same time that I was doing this, I was also working on my land, which is called Bear Island, which I bought in 2017, and which a lot of the book is based around and focuses on. And at the same time that I was, 1 hour at a time trying to write this book, or not trying to write this book, but doing it anyway, I was chipping away at this forest, Bear Island, and all of these myriad problems that it had. Similar to the book, if I had tried to heal this ecosystem all at once, I never would have even started. And what I could do was just one thing, right? One day, 1 hour, in order to in some way reach toward this vision that I had of this forest that could be healthy again. When I started with it, Bear Island was this I viewed it as like this perfect symbol for the modern world, a forest that had every problem that a forest could have. And I just started to kind of nudge it in the right direction. And with both things, with the book, with this forest, what I felt like I was doing was every day I would just take a little rock, the size of my palm, and step off my back porch, and I would just throw it back there. It's a gesture that by itself, totally insignificant, completely meaningless. And then you just do it again and again and again, and eventually you look back there and you're like, pile's getting pretty big. So after, in the case of the book, after doing that process, writing an hour a day for 6 years, I was able to have a pretty good draft. And then I got a publisher to agree to take it on. And I said, this thing's going to be out by the end of the week. And they said, your publication date's in 2 years. And that led us to last September. So anyway, I want to do a couple readings from the book. The first reading is from the introduction, and it's sort of what inspired me to write the book in the first place. Once it seemed that there were only two paths to follow: a status quo that saw forests and other ecosystems as commodities, and an opposing force that sought to protect ecosystems from ourselves, to leave them alone. As forests everywhere struggle under the weight of the many threats and the stressors of the modern world, as they suffer the legacies of the past and confront a future that promises challenges like never before, I have realized that neither of these two paths is enough. I have realized that the world needs action intertwined with compassion, relationship imbued with responsibility, death infused with life. I have gone my own way, fostering a divergent vision, a reimagining of what it means to love a forest, engaging in the radical act of trading simplicity for complexity, trading a tidy vision for one that is true. My journey toward these realizations has been long and lonely and sinuous. In my little house at the foot of the mountain, my bookshelf is crowded with books about trees and plants and animals, birds and bears and fungi, the relationship between people and ecosystems, and the threats both face. Never have I found a book that has articulated what a forest truly is. Not just its botany and its biology, the contours of its many pieces and its parts, but how this entire living community moves and behaves and changes. Never have I found a book that described what it means to care for a forest like Bear Island, an ecosystem that has been changed and degraded and depleted and left to suffer alone. Never have I found a book that described the pain and the joy and the anxiety of trying to love and protect an ecosystem, of guiding it toward wholeness at this strange and crucial moment in time. No book has prepared me for the many complex and bittersweet choices that I would someday make at Bear Island, or for the fact that these actions would be celebrations, the substance of a truly radical and responsible relationship with the forest. In this book, I draw these disparate threads together, exploring what it means to love a forest in this changed and changing world. It is a new land ethic, a vision of relationship and responsibility, freedom and power, resilience and humility, legacy, beauty, and change. In a world that is both human and wild, both wounded and vibrant, both suppressed and emergent, this is a vision both for how we manage forests and take care of ecosystems, and how we manage ourselves, how we take care of each other. So, I want to revisit that last point. Hey, Dickon.
Hi, Ethan.
I want to revisit that last point too, because this is another really important thing that I think hasn't been well addressed in our discourse about like this moment that we're in with this biosphere, with these ecosystems, which is that we live here too. And that, you know, at the same time that we want to have these ecosystems that are vibrant and abundant and resilient, that are full of life, at the same time that we want to help them heal, at the same time that we want to help them move forward, we also want things for ourselves. We want to live in societies where we have access to opportunity and, you know, our own abundance. We want to have resources. We need to recognize that everything that we consume, everything that we do, everything that we wear, everything that we eat in some way impacts ecosystems. And it's okay. It can be okay. But as we're trying to think about these solutions for the thing that we call nature, we need to recognize that we are integrated into these ecosystems, and to just account for that, right? And to just think about the compromises and the sacrifices that we need to make in that respect as well. So I want to go back and just read a very quick thing that I skipped over just now. As a tangent, you guys like vocab? Vocabulary? Heard of it? I really like vocabulary, and I collect these like forestry vocab words. My favorite one ever, I thought of a new one that I really like too, but my favorite one ever is the structure that attaches a fir needle to the twig on a fir tree. It's called the suborbicular leaf cushion. Someone was also recently talking to me about chaga. You know chaga? And they have chaga. What we know as chaga is actually not like a fruiting body of this fungus. It's a hardened mass of mycelium that's known as an aerial sclerotium. It's good to keep these things up there, you know? Here's another vocab word for you. Forests are socio-ecological systems. Our lives are forever stitched into the green flesh of the biosphere. The separation of the human world from the wild world is an illusion. We cannot care for ecosystems without recognizing that we will always rely on them and we will always tax them, that human life will always be precious and worth nourishing and will always come at a cost. We cannot choose if we will impact ecosystems, if we will impact peoples across the globe, if we will impact the lives of future generations. We can only choose what that impact will be. So there's a lot of themes in this book, you know, and the chapters are named out of them. Things like relationship and responsibility and freedom and power, humility, beauty, change. I think that of all of these, one of the most powerful is this idea of responsibility, right? That we don't actually get to choose if we inhabit this moment, right? If we stand on these legacies, if we are here where we are and when we are right now, the only thing that we get to choose is if we take responsibility for that stuff. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk to you a little bit about my journey. And it's been really fun since the book has come out to have this experience of people like asking me about myself. And, you know, they want to know like how I became a forester and how I ended up writing this book and stuff. And so like a superhero, I get to have an origin story. And we all do also, by the way. And if you haven't done the exercise on your own of crafting your own origin story, would recommend because what it allows you to do is you can like go back and look at all these random things that happen to you in your life and be like, oh yeah, like this led to that, this led to that, this led to that. And it starts to make everything seem a whole lot better. When I was just like, you know, in that feeling like in a very haphazard way, just bumping around for no reason, doing all this random stuff. So here's my origin story. I grew up in this town in southeastern Vermont, a little village called Saxton's River. Has anyone heard of Saxton's River, Vermont? Really? Yeah. No kidding. 300 people. Looks exactly the same now as it did when I was a little kid there. And surrounded by forests. And when you hear these narratives about these nature writers and ecologists and biologists, and they talk about their origin story, they're always like, I was the nature kid, you know, and I was always like crawling around in the dirt, looking at bugs or tracking deer, or, you know, I always was out in the woods and I always knew that this is something that I wanted to do. And that wasn't my experience at all. I had no idea that I wanted to do anything related to forests. What I do remember very strongly is that I wanted to get out of there. Bad. Real bad. And I remember when I was a junior in high school saying to somebody, I don't know where I'm going to go to college, but I know where I'm not going to go. And that's the University of Vermont. Because everybody goes there and I'm getting out of here. Well, the first month of my senior year of high school, I got a letter from the University of Vermont that told me I got this scholarship called the Green and Gold Scholarship, which is full scholarship. And I was like, yes, I'm going to the University of Vermont. Absolutely no principles, no integrity. So I was like, yeah, just, you know, screw it, we'll just do that. And so, but even once I got there, I had no idea what I wanted to study, and I was taking all these random classes. And at the time, I was dating my high school girlfriend, the first big love of my life. And she had decided she wanted to go on this like wilderness expedition, this big trip with this program. And it was 5 months long. And when she was coming back, I was finishing up my second semester at the University of Vermont. And when she came back, she had had this massive, life-changing experience. And I had not. I'd just been like playing beer pong in my dorm room or whatever. And we weren't connecting, and it was freaking me out. And I thought we were going to break up. And so, as any perfectly rational 19-year-old would, I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going on a wilderness expedition. And the next one left in 2 weeks, and it was a 6-month expedition where we skied north for 3 months, and then we built a canoe and we canoed back down. Now, in retrospect, I did this for no reason. Relationship didn't work out, but of course it completely changed the course of my life. And then after I did that, all I wanted to do was just be in the woods. And so I worked as a wilderness guide. I lived in this like uninsulated yurt with a fir bough floor in the woods of Maine for a year. I worked with draft animals a little bit. I did a little bit of draft horse logging. And then I got a letter from the University of Vermont that said that I had to come back or I was going to lose my scholarship. And I remember sitting on the bow floor of my yurt and holding a paper list of all the majors at the University of Vermont. And I scrolled down and I saw forestry, and I didn't know what it was, but it had the word forest in it. True story. And I said, guess we'll try that. And it ended up, of course, being a really good fit. So there's a couple things that are really special about forestry. And, you know, acknowledging also, by the way, that forestry is nuanced and people practice it in all kinds of different ways. My experience of this trade is that it's really, really special for a couple different reasons. One is that I think it approaches ecosystems in exactly the right way, which is that, you know, within these natural sciences, environmental sciences, whatever you want to call them, there are all these like little sub-disciplines, right? You can be an entomologist and you can study insects, and you can be an ornithologist and you can study birds. You can be a mycologist and you can study fungi, or a myrmecologist and study ants. You can be a botanist and study plants. There's all different kinds of ways that you can sort of specialize and really delve into one part of that ecosystem. And as a forester, you're sort of responsible for all of that stuff and for none of it individually. You're responsible for the ecosystem itself, the forest. And when you take classes and all these things, you have to be a forester, you have to understand a little bit about not just dendrology and trees, but also wildlife biology and soil science and geology and hydrology, all of these pieces and parts that combine to create these dynamic and complex ecosystems that are forests. And as you learn about them, you start to see how all of these pieces and parts fit together. And you start to see how things like biodiversity, which I think is often misunderstood as something that's like nice to have. Isn't it nice that we can go out into our forest and we can see 80 species of breeding birds, right? Isn't that a cool optional thing that we do? And then really you start to see that actually biodiversity is the currency of our ecosystems, that those pieces and parts are integral not just to their appearance, but to their function, the way that they work, their integrity, their functionality. And there's another part of forests, of being a forester, I should say, that's really special, which is that at its heart, forestry is a discipline of action. So imbued in us is this idea that we do not have to be bystanders in these ecosystems. That, on this continent, as people have done for thousands of years, we can go into these ecosystems and we can see what's going on, and then we can do something about it. And I think it's really, really, a powerful idea that is really the most natural thing in the world, but in this moment in time feels like such a departure, right? That we feel, again, like if we love these forests, the way that we love them is to leave them alone, which makes perfect sense because every one of these problems that we perceive our forests having are problems that we've caused. So in my own experience, I've had the opportunity to, after studying forestry, to do a whole lot of different really cool stuff. So I had the opportunity to go work on these like industrial timberlands in the Adirondacks, which taught me a lot about how I don't want to manage forests, and then also gave me the field skills to be able to go and get the job that I actually wanted, which was working as a forester on, smaller forests, family forests in central Vermont, and then to become a service forester, what we call in Vermont the county foresters. I was the Chittenden County Forester for the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation from 2016 to 2024. And one of the things that I learned about myself in that role is that in the forestry world, I'm a little bit of a unicorn. And the reason for that is if you talk to foresters, you will learn that most of them don't like talking to people very much. I actually had this experience. I was talking to a forestry student yesterday, and he was talking about how my job has changed and whatever. And I was remembering that I would have these days where me and my dog, JR, would get up at 4:30 in the morning, go drive 2 hours away, go work all day long, come back, you like drink a quart of coffee on the way home so you don't fall asleep, and then you fall asleep on your face, and then with all your clothes on, and then you get up, and then I was like living in Burlington with roommates, and then someone would be home, and then I would say something to them, and I would realize that it was the first words that I'd said for the whole day. It's at like 8:30 p.m. But in this role as county forester, I did hundreds of public events, and I did all this other stuff, and really realized that a big part of managing forests is managing people. Not just because we are the biggest threat to forests, but because we are also like potentially their greatest hope. That we actually have so much power and so much opportunity that can be used not to just degrade these ecosystems, but to actually guide them toward a better place. So in this book, and I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm going to talk for a few more minutes, and then I want to also take some of the questions that you have. Another big learning experience for me was that in 2017, I became the owner of this piece of land, this forest, that I named Bear Island. And, in retrospect, Bear Island was the perfect forest for someone like me, and the perfect catalyst to tell this story. And, the whole book is sort of like wrapped around the story of this amazing forest in northwestern Vermont. the first I heard of Bear Island was, it was this advertisement on a realtor's website. And it said 175 acres, and then it just had a picture of Camel's Hump. You guys know Camel's Hump? This iconic mountain. Nothing about the land, just like Camel's Hump. And as if to say, put your mansion right here, and you can look at Camel's Hump. And I said, you know, geez, 175 acres, and it was like pretty cheap. I was kind of like, what's wrong with it? I was about to find out. And I said, geez, you know, I'll go take a look. So my first impression of it in the flesh was driving up the access road onto the land, and it hadn't been properly stabilized, and it was washed out. And there was a ravine cutting right down the center, and I had to straddle it with the wheels of my truck. I rolled up onto the log landing, this clearing where that picture had been taken from, and it was covered in trash. Bags of household trash, tires and cables and hoses and pieces of busted equipment partially buried in the earth. And this network of these deep, 3-foot deep ruts going off in every direction. Just bleeding murky water down the mountain. And it was not a very good way to start. But I said, you know, I'm here anyway, so let's go take a look. And so I started walking up the main logging trail, skid trail, and it was incredibly steep, and I was getting covered in sweat, and I was picking all these ticks off myself. And as I kept on walking, I started to get this weird feeling. Something was wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. And I was walking for like an hour before it hit me. And what was bothering me was that there were no healthy trees there. And once I realized this, I started looking. I'd never seen a forest, no healthy trees. Started looking around, and I was like, no healthy trees, no healthy trees. Every tree that I saw was declining, diseased. It was incredibly spooky and jarring. So what I now know happened is that 30 years before, the landowner, who actually owned thousands of acres in this valley, had just told these loggers, without supervision of a forest or anything like that, just said, go cut every tree bigger than 10 inches in diameter on the mountain, which is pretty small. It's like that big. So the problem with this is an unethical practice that we refer to as diameter limit cutting, which is sort of within this family of practices that we talk about as high grading, which is where you go into the forest and you cut all of the most valuable high-grade trees, and you leave the least valuable low-grade trees standing there. And the problem with this is that those high-grade trees are also the healthiest trees in the forest, in most cases, and those low-grade trees are the least healthy trees in the forest. So what you're doing is basically the inverse of what any responsible forester or forest manager would ever do. You're managing the forest to be less healthy. And the best analogy that I can give you for what this was like is, it would be like if you, in the middle of summer, went out to your vegetable garden to go weed it, right? And you just, there's the vegetable garden, you can hardly keep up with the weeds because they're getting so tall, and you kneel down and weed out all the vegetables. That's what this forest felt like. And there's an argument to be made that it would have been a greater kindness to this forest if they had just cut all the trees, because then at least there would have been enough light for a new generation of trees that had a chance to be healthy to grow, right? As it was, those unhealthy trees kind of expanded their crowns, and there they were, stuck. As I kept walking, I found that there were places where the forest was kind of trying to regenerate, where there was enough light, and all of those young trees were getting browsed by deer. There was evidence of deer overpopulation as well. I slid down over these cliffs that bisect the land from west to east and right into a 30-acre infestation of a non-native invasive plant called Japanese barberry. 3 foot tall, pure, 30 acres. Which, if you know that and other plants like that, you know that that's a forest without a future, right? That unless something is done, that forest cannot move forward, that it will be that ostensibly forever. And that obviously in that space there can be none of these incredibly important regenerative processes, none of those incredibly important native plant communities that really define forests and provide habitat for so many of these creatures. So I was pushing through that Japanese barberry patch, again, getting covered in ticks. That's what barberry does. And got back to my truck, and I said, forget this place. Probably in different words, out loud. And I left. And then sure enough, I was like, yeah, I'll just find some other forest somewhere else. But over the next couple of months, I started to think about it more and more and more, and kind of look at it as driving the highway, and to wonder if that forest was actually hopeless, or if there were things that I could do to help. And I decided to go back a second time. And the second time I went back, I started to find all this cool stuff. So I started to find that there were actually some healthy trees there after all that were just so hidden behind these masses of unhealthy trees that I hadn't seen them. And I started to find all these plants that I love, like sweet fern and low bush blueberry, maple leaf viburnum, red columbine, pink corydalis. I started to find that there were these rock outcrops covered in reindeer moss with these sweeping views of the Winooski River Valley. And I was standing on one of those rock outcrops when I said to myself, I'm going to try and buy this place. Never done anything like that before. And so I went back to my former boss who happened to sell forest land real estate. And I was like, Mike, there's this piece of land and I want to make an offer. And how much should I offer? How do I do this? And he said, well, let me ask you a couple questions. Does it have any timber on it? And I said, no. And he said, any real estate potential? And I said, no. And he said, is the access good? No. Could it be a sugar bush? No. And we went down the line, no, 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 no. And eventually he said, well, Ethan, this place sounds terrible. Just offer them like nothing, and don't be afraid of hurting their feelings. And that's how I became the owner of this piece of land. And I'll tell you what, it's one thing to believe that all we got to do is just leave these ecosystems alone and everything will be fine, in principle, right? When we're standing in here, we're talking about it, it seems like a good idea, it seems like it makes sense. And in reality, what you need to know in this or in any other place is that nature is beautiful and it is resilient and it is not magical and it is not immortal. That these ecosystems are made up of trillions of organisms, millions or billions of which, of thousands of species, maybe in a single handful of forest soil. And they are these incredibly beautiful and dynamic, complex ecosystems defined by relationship, defined by change, by these evolutionary partnerships, symbioses enacted over massive, unthinkable spans of deep time. And there is nothing about them that is incapable of being harmed or hurt or degraded, right? And so it's one thing where like nature's going to take care of everything. And it's quite another thing when I'm standing on that log landing covered in trash in a forest with no healthy trees, with deer overpopulation, in a biodiversity crisis, in a mass extinction, in a climate crisis, watching thousands of years of soil roll down the mountain through those skidder ruts. And I have to ask myself in this moment that, would it be a greater kindness to this place to leave it alone and hope that some magical process someday occurred and this forest would be okay again? Or to do absolutely everything in my power to help make it healthy again? And in this, sort of effort that unfolded of healing this land, I've realized that, back to the origin story superhero rhetoric, I guess, is that I have a couple of superpowers. One of them is that I am not a purist. And so I could ask myself, really, radically, what tools do we have to solve these problems? And as much as I would love to tell you that this journey was all about me just, dancing through the forest and just throwing wildflower seeds like this, it wasn't like that. And it involved far more operation of diesel equipment than I thought it would. Me having to teach myself to do things like to run an excavator, right? So I could restore those eroding skid trails and build new, more resilient trails. Doing things like teaching myself to be a hunter so that I could kill deer, right? And help attenuate this deer overpopulation problem. I really enjoy and was surprised by the fact that, 30 years ago, these loggers came to my forest and they used these specific tools, these pieces of logging equipment that we call skidders, specifically timberjack cable skidders from probably the late 70s, early 80s, and chainsaws to create these problems that I'm going to spend the rest of my life fixing, right? And today, as I heal this ecosystem, two of my most powerful tools are my 1981 timberjack cable skidder and my chainsaw. And it's been such a surprising and wonderful thing to see how so many of these tools that can be used to harm ecosystems can be used in a different way to help them heal. And there's another thing that's like that, which is us. There is no doubt that every one of the problems that we see within our ecosystems has been caused by people. And there is no doubt that of all the opportunities, of all the potentials for healing and emergence, that us being able to actually affect change in these ecosystems, be able to take these tools and use them in a different way, is their greatest opportunity for healing. And we just have to do it, and we have to figure out how to do it. And so in the title of the book, How to Love a Forest, the bittersweet work of tending a changing world, I wanted to speak to how a lot of these things that I had to do to heal this forest were not easy, right? They were not things that we just go out there and we plant a tree and everybody feels good about it. They required me to go so far beyond that, to the place where I had to really confront all of these really challenging things. I don't want to cut any trees. I love trees. I don't want to kill any deer. I love deer. And to really figure out what true love really is, right? And I think the thing that makes this a real love story is that in the greatest love stories of our time, you don't just go out there and fall in love and then everything works out good. End of story. It requires compromises and sacrifices and doing stuff that you never thought you'd have to do. Right? The analogy I think of a lot, I don't have kids myself, but I imagine that if any of us had a child and they needed some medicine or a treatment because they were sick, and maybe it was something that we said that we'd never do or that we wish we didn't have to do, right? Or that we were uncomfortable with, or whatever, wouldn't we do it? Any of us would. And I don't know why, with these ecosystems, we get to that place and we turn back. Whereas doing what I believe is the most powerful expression of love, which is to persist, even when it makes us uncomfortable. So I'm going to do one more reading. It's a little bit of a longer one. And then I'd be happy to take your questions if you have any. The one thing I want to say just to preface this is that, this is a book that is about forest ecology, but for me, it's really a book that's about a lot of other stuff, like freedom and hope. I think it's very clear-eyed about the problems that these ecosystems and all the species that rely on them, ourselves included, face. And it's also a very hopeful book. Because one thing that Bear Island has allowed me to see is as I've been willing to do all of these actions, things as difficult to understand, right, as cutting a tree, I have seen this incredible transformation where I've seen this forest that had every problem that a forest could have, go from being sort of a symbol of everything that was wrong with the modern world to now being beautiful and hopeful and abundant, a symbol of what's possible and a symbol of hope. And not every forest in the world is as degraded as Bear Island. But when you really start to see them, you start to realize that pretty much every forest we walk through is degraded in some way. Every single one of them. They're dealing with these incredible threats of the past, present, and future, and a lot of them need our help. And the amazing thing is that we don't even have to wait for like someone really smart in a lab coat to like invent some miracle cure to fix these things. That a lot of these solutions we can do today with existing technology and existing resources. And if we do, we can actually not just like bail out the boat and keep these ecosystems from collapsing and hand future generations a world that like isn't any worse than this world is right now, which seems at some time to be like our loftiest objective. Wouldn't that be great? If we could just make it so that the world didn't get any worse. And instead build a better world. All right. Thanks for bearing with me. The storm clouds stamp their feet. They are corralled along the shifting path of the big river, thundering between the walls of the broad valley. The clouds move west, driven like cattle toward the mountains. As empty as it often feels, there is something beautiful about a life lived in the aftermath. Here, in the junkyard of the Anthropocene, we hold the fate of the world, all of its ecosystems, all of its peoples in our hands. In this moment, we can allow this biosphere, our home, to sink further into dysfunction and disarray, or we can make the radical and bittersweet decisions necessary to choose a different path. Inside of this catalyzing moment, we have an opportunity to reimagine our relationship to ecosystems and our relationship to each other, to redefine what we are and what is precious to us. As empty as they often feel, there is something beautiful about a landscape of forests that are just a fraction of their true potential. The forests of our lives are still only at the beginning of their journeys. They may yet become diverse and complex, rich with legacies, ancient again. With our help, these forests may rediscover a capacity for life beyond imagining, an abundance that this world has not known for generations. I pick up another acorn, another product of thousands of years of adaptation and change, another precious thing chained to the legacies of the past and hurtling toward an uncertain future. Perhaps it is doomed. Perhaps it contains endless possibilities. Humidity cloaks the land, drawing tiny round beads of sweat from my skin. For a moment, the mountain is cast in golden light. It smells sharp and strong. As I touch another acorn, a raindrop strikes the back of my hand, rolling between the small bones of my fingers. Suddenly, droplets are stippling the soil like falling stars, throwing up little clouds of dust. I have nowhere to be, and so I kneel, watching the water run around the stumps and the upturned leaves, drawing spider webs on the earth. Someday I will tell my children that the caves in the talus are a womb, the origin of all the black bears on the mountain, and that the springs in the big bowl are the source of all of its waters. Someday I will walk these trails with my children and teach them to reimagine forests as communities of complexity and depth and expansiveness, communities that are fated to change, to celebrate both the miracle of life and the miracle of death. Someday I will kneel beside these stumps, a young forest blooming around me, and teach my children the imperfect truth of what it means to love a forest. Someday I will teach my children that this world is not ours to hold, but that we hold it anyway. That each of us is a steward for one brief and precious moment in time. In our short lives, we must learn to pair power and freedom with humility, to embody relationship and responsibility, even when it breaks our hearts. Someday I will teach my children that despite everything, we are destined to thrive, that we are destined to live in a world that is beautiful. In the years to come, the traces of this moment will fade. The empty patch cut will have become a diverse young forest. the stumps softening and mixing with those of the oaks cut decades ago. I will walk through this young forest and remember this autumn day when my hands were young. I will remember that each tall, perfect oak was once an acorn between my fingertips, that this forest is a child of responsibility, something that we could only have embodied together. No one but me will ever truly know the pieces of myself that I have left on this mountain, the labor of love that being the steward of this land has been. I will know, and that is enough. We owe too much to the future to be imprisoned by the past. As the storm passes over me, I'm grateful to be anything at all, grateful to be alive at a time when there is so much worth saving. I want to live in the world that will arise from this moment, the world built by people who are brave and humble and resilient, who make countless bittersweet compromises, who live their lives with the dream of a better world burning in their chests. I want to live in a world that will be created by people planting acorns in the rain. Sometimes this life feels like autumn, the exhausted end of a boundless summer. Today I choose to live in a world in which spring is just breaking, a world that is just awakening, just beginning to discover what it truly is. I look toward the broken ridge of the mountain and feel a powerful nostalgia, not for the past, but for the future. High above the storm, the light is swelling, calling everything upward toward a world that is just beginning. Thank you. After I read that one, I feel like I need to go take a little nappy. Oh my God. Any of you got any questions for me? After all that?
I have a very unromantic question. After what you just read, but I really need to ask you this. What did you do about that barberry?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this question, and then you're going to just ask me questions about this for the rest of the time. You think it's hard to understand how the cutting of a tree could be an act of love and an act of healing? Herbicide. People often ask me, of the things I had to learn how to do, what was the hardest to learn, and what was the biggest, ideological shift? The hardest thing to learn, by far, hunting. Number one with a bullet, as they say, get it? And the biggest thing that I had to wrap my mind around was the herbicide thing. Because the thing about it is, especially as a service forester, I saw people, it cannot be overstated what a profound and existential threat to everything beautiful that forests are and that they provide, that these non-native invasive plants are. I mean, they just are. And they need to be dealt with for us to be able to do literally anything that we want to do, including nothing. Even if we want to do nothing else in our forests, never cut a tree, you can't do that and expect to have good outcomes unless you also control those plants. And as a service forester, I literally witnessed hundreds of people try to, I'm from Vermont, nobody wants to use herbicide. And I witnessed hundreds of people attempt to kill these non-native invasive plants without using herbicide. The success rate was 0%. Not even close. Not even close one time. And so, like forests, like ecosystems, what do we do when we encounter something like that? Is we adapt. And it just happens that virtually every conservation organization that manages these plants uses herbicide already. And it's not because we don't care. It's because we care so deeply. Because we care so deeply that we're willing to make these complex decisions. And actually, a lot of the things that you're wondering about, these questions have already been answered, such as, what's worse, the invasive plants or the herbicide? The invasive plants are worse. And such as, can we apply these herbicides in a way that protects our soils, our waters, the futures of our forest, our biodiversity? And the answer is yes. And the reason that a lot of these conservation organizations that you may know and love haven't told you about this is because the optics of using herbicide are so bad and it requires such a nuanced understanding of like what we're trying to do that they just didn't want to deal with the bad optics. But I trust you guys. And I just think that if there's something like that we're doing and we're okay with it and like we've made this decision, then it should be something that we're celebrating, honestly. And the nuance of it is that we can simultaneously acknowledge something like the way that herbicide is used in almost every other context may be completely inappropriate. And it can be used in this one way that is actually like sort of in an interesting way that I feel is kind of subversive, life-giving and regenerative and healing, right? And that can actually sort of bring these forests back to life, truly. And when you do this, like with a 30-acre infestation of barberry this high, I had never heard of anyone dealing with a problem like that. Only people who had failed. And suddenly I have a forest that today has this diverse understory of all these native wildflowers. I have a whole chapter in the book about it, especially these spring ephemeral wildflowers that I really love, that are there now. And when a tree falls over, or when I cut one, the forest has the ability to regenerate native species now, and to support, the thousands of other species that those native tree and plant and shrub species support. So yeah, the barberry's dead. And I think, I think in proportion to like how difficult that was to get around my head around that, I now view that as also being one of the most radical things that I've ever done.
The root systems are brutal.
Yeah.
Once it was dead, you excavate it out?
No. You want to know something weird? So I did, when I killed the barberry, and there was a few other species in the mix as well. I killed the barberry, and they've got all these little stems, and they got very brittle after they died, and then they disappeared. And so now, like, I didn't take any pictures of this place, and so now I'm there, and I'm like, did this happen? Because they're like gone without a trace. You don't have to do anything. It just goes away. What?
How long does it take to go away?
For like the physical structure, it took like a year. Yeah.
And the soil was, the microorganisms were still alive?
Yeah.
Or they, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you that it is lush today. And yeah, I mean, you have to it's like anything else. Like, again, we're not, you don't just want to like indiscriminately like mist blow a forest. We're talking about applying like minuscule fractions of an ounce of this chemical to target plants individually. Yeah. I told you we were going to talk about this during this time.
How about beach bark disease and the offshoots? Did you run into that problem in
It's like one of the main problems.
Ethan, remember to repeat the question because
Oh,
we're on television.
we're on television.
I don't want to hear.
The question was about beach bark disease, which I actually write a lot about in the book. And I actually use the story of beech to sort of like illustrate how much our forests have changed. It's important that we know this. We have this thing that I also talk about in the book that a term you may have heard of called shifting baseline syndrome, right? Which is where the conditions that we're used to, we assume are normal, when in fact, the forests that we have across our landscape today are completely abnormal and actually bear little resemblance to like what forests have been on this landscape for thousands of years, both by virtue of being really young and almost all of them having regenerated from like an agricultural field within the last 60 to 100 years. And then also having to deal with all these other things like deer overpopulation and these non-native pests and pathogens in plants. So beech bark disease is a disease that was introduced that affects American beech. It was introduced like in the early 1900s, I think 1920s. And it's what makes beech trees, instead of having this beautiful, smooth, what I learned as elephant skin bark, perfectly smooth gray bark, to having this like really cracked, pockmarked, cobbly bark. And so the amazing thing about beech trees, and I wish that I had these stats right in front of me for Massachusetts, but in Vermont, beech was by far the most common tree species in the state prior to colonization. And in the county that I live in and where Bear Island is, it was probably about 60% of all the trees. And at the time, American beech was a tree species that was capable of living for many hundreds of years, maybe 400 years plus. And then, of course, our whole landscape got cleared in the early 1800s, down here a little bit sooner. And what we saw is, as those forests were generated 150 years later, beech wasn't part of a mix. That mix, it's a little bit more shade tolerant and slow growing. But even as it came into these younger forests, it was affected by that beech bark disease. And so now, instead of being this like really dominant, long-lived tree that lives 400 years, it lives to be 40 to 60 years old. And then it gets stressed out, and it does this thing that beech does where it shoots up these root sprouts, these clones from its root system. They also are genetically identical, these new saplings from the root system, and then they also get beech bark disease, and then you end up in these waves of mortality, also exacerbated by the fact that white-tailed deer, which are overpopulated almost across this entire continent, don't like to eat beech trees. So they'll eat all of the other trees, effectively weeding around the beech trees. So think about that for a second. As we're thinking about again, this sort of pervasive concept that maybe there's a chance that if we just protect forests from ourselves, that everything's going to be fine. Think about the fact that the most common tree species across millions of acres, at least, literally doesn't do any of the things that it did here for thousands of years. Think about a species that was 60% of the entire forest across an entire state. How many different species of organisms would have had really specialized relationships with that species? How many different species of organisms would have relied on it in some way, right? And it doesn't do that anymore. And so sometimes it feels like when we have this idea that we don't need to help ecosystems and we don't need to make these tough decisions, it feels a little bit like, you're in gym class and you broke your ankle and they're like, just walk it off, and you're like, yeah, it'll be fine. You're a person, you can heal, and it's like, how? With what resources? With what functionality? With what pieces? It's not this amorphous thing that no matter what happens to these ecosystems, they'll be okay. They're made up of these species, of these natural processes, of these relationships, all of which have been disrupted. And so I think that our responsibility toward them is in proportion to that level of change.
So are herbicides the only treatment for it? We've got a problem with the sprouts, especially.
With the sprouts, you don't have to worry about them anymore because there's another pathogen now called beech leaf disease, which is a microscopic nematode that's just going to kill them all.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
There's another, so the question was, what do I have to do about all these beech sprouts? And my answer was, you probably don't have to worry about it because there's a microscopic nematode called beech leaf disease, which we just discovered 3 years ago has already spread thousands of miles, which is probably just going to kill them all. It's a very bittersweet thing because I have to remind myself, even as beech and its ability to sprout thwarts everything that I try to do. No matter what I'm trying to regenerate or manage my forest for, beech, it's just beech sprouts, diseased beech all the time. I love beech. And I want beech to be healthy again. And there are actually some beech trees that we call clean beech, which have this smooth bark that suggests that they might actually be resistant to beech bark disease. And I've been really going out of my way to try and promote those so that their offspring could then maybe promote some resistant genetics onto the future generations. But there's another tree pathogen called beech leaf disease. It's probably just going to kill them all. Dang.
Folks, 2 questions, 2 more, please.
We're seeing, sort of species by species, the biodiversity of northern woodlands get knocked out. Are favor in like just migration or just mixing in new species to maintain biodiversity, or you a believer in like they should make their own way up through?
No, I mean, we're probably going to have to, at some point, we're probably going to have to move them to some degree. We're not in like full-on assisted migration mode yet, meaning that we're not, in most cases, like taking species from 500 miles south of here, like a tulip poplar or something, and like bringing it up and planting it in the woods. But what we're seeing a lot of is this, what we call assisted range expansion, which is where we take species that may be on the northern end of their range, and helping them expand that range northward. And one thing that we're recognizing, actually, and there's been a lot of interesting research about this, is the need to expand our capacity to actually grow trees. Because here in the Northeast, we don't ever plant trees. You know, the way that I plant a tree is I just like cut 10 trees down, and then there's 50,000 seedlings there in 5 years. You know, we rely completely on this natural regeneration, and we're just recognizing that we may need to build this capacity to, you know, number one, nursery capacity, and then number two, like the ability to actually plant these trees so that we can accomplish that assisted range expansion and then maybe in the future assisted migration. But the other part of this is at the same time that we're doing that, we just need to recognize that, and I know, and this is probably not going to happen for a little while, but that we need to invest in research to also like bring back the species that we are losing or have lost. Because you can't lose a species, period. And there is like, you know, some folks, the American Chestnut Foundation, right, trying to bring back the American chestnut, but we need to like supercharge that research and to recognize that like, you know, protecting these ecosystems, which we completely rely on for our lives and our quality of life that are so integrated into our lives ecologically and economically and culturally, so many different ways. Like we need to value them like the asset that they are. You know, it's like, it's national security, right? Maybe we can, if we bill it as that, we might be able to get some funding in the next 4 years. But so I think that that's the other thing is like working on multiple different scales where we also like need to be really trying to build, you know, figure out how to get emerald ash borer resistant ash trees back into the woods, Dutch elms disease resistant elm trees back into our wetlands and riparian areas, beech leaf disease and beech bark disease resistant beech trees back into our forests. That needs to be happening at the same time, but it's tougher because that's going to require so much more like higher level research funding, or some people like you who want to do it. And you know, we'll kind of take that on from a research perspective. I'm not good at research, so it's going to have to be. I'll just wave my hands around and talk about it, and then someone else will actually do it. Let's go with this guy over here.
What's the outcome? What's the desired outcome looking into the future? Is it a self-regenerating forest, like supposedly there was prior to European interference? What are your goals there?
So the question is, what is the outcome of the future of all this stuff I'm trying to do? And then when you said what is the outcome, the first thing I thought of was abundance. Right? Like what we want to do, right, is to survive here. And you know, again, recognizing that we actually objectively like rely on these ecosystems. We need them to live here and to do so many different things for us, to clean our air and our water and regulate this climate and do all these other things. And that also they are themselves important, right? And that they are filled with all of these organisms that also have the right to exist. One of the things that I thought of as like a catchphrase that you guys can tell me if you think it's any good or not, but about these sort of compromises that we need to make is that if we want to save everything, we can't save everything, right? So it requires us, if we want to, in the big picture, build this better world, we need to be able to like make some compromises. We need to be able to cut some trees and do this stuff. And so my goal would be ecosystems that this is what my goal that I'm actually manifesting is ecosystems that are healthier and more vibrant and more abundant than any ecosystems that we or our great-grandparents or our great-great-grandparents or our great-great-great-grandparents on this continent have ever known. And human societies that not just value those ecosystems as the irreplaceable resources that they are, but that also recognize how integrated into these ecosystems their lives are. One thing that I talk about at the end of, I think, the first chapter of the book is that something to the effect of, I wish not for a perfect relationship with these ecosystems, but for a good one. And that's what I would hope for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give him a big hand.
And if you want me to sign a book for you, or if you want to buy a book, I'll be over there after.
Thank you so much. Well done.